Hi everybody, Helen here for Think Differently Thursday. It's Thursday again, the week's come round so quickly. And really great for me to have a guest today, Will. Hi Will.
Hi there.
Are you okay?
Yeah, fine, thanks. Just I don't know if I'm enjoying lockdown but just keeping reasonably busy during it.
Good, great. I know you a little bit, Will. Do you want to just briefly introduce yourself for people that don't know you?
Yeah, married to Jenny, who I think you spoke to fairly recently.
Yes.
And got two sons, Matt and Johnny, and they're both pretty grown up now and have grandchildren, and been enjoying just chatting with them, during lockdown.
Yeah.
And I've been at the Forge, for quite a few years.
Fantastic. And are the teddies behind you an indication of grandchildren?
That is an indication of grandchildren. Yes, just to asking questions through Teddy or Ganasha,
Oh, that is a really cute teddy. I think teddies really vary, don't they? I bought my nephew a really nice teddy recently. That is a nice one. It looks like a proper Ted.
Yeah, he's been in the family some time.
Oh, nice.
I think Matthew actually had him, when he was a kid. So.
Oh, really? That is cute. And you said that you've been at the Forge a long time, which I think is very true. How long have you been part of the Forge?
Well, I think the Forge started, when was it, 1992? 92? I think we joined in 94.
Okay.
So maybe I think it was around about then.
Yeah.
Such a long time ago.
So, yeah. I know, it feels like it shouldn't be, but 1994 is a very long time ago.
Yeah, we sort of moved to Suffolk in 1990, and it was for 93, 94 we joined.
Okay.
Well, so it was MCF then.
Yeah, of course. And so at that stage, what sort of numbers was the church?
Well, it was around about 30, I think.
Yeah.
We probably made it 32 or something like that.
So you've seen the church go from 30-something to, well, pre-lockdown and COVID, to 3 different locations and various global partnerships. So has that been an exciting journey to have been part of something that was relatively small to what it is now?
Absolutely, yes. It's amazing what God's done, really. And I was, shortly after joining the church, I became an elder, and I was an elder on and off, the church until 2010.
Okay.
And just being amazing being part of that growth. And with that growth, there's always these sort of growing pains as well. When you make changes and you go from one service to 2 services, you change venues, you have, more venues that you open up, and just thinking about, the decisions you have to make, and is it the right thing? But I think the Forge is amazing, really, and the way that just so many more people are coming, and just lives transformed.
Yeah. And I think we've seen so much change. I think that has what made us, an exciting place to be, hasn't it? Oh no, my landline is ringing. Sorry about that. It's a ridiculous noise. It'll stop.
While that rings, I'll just do a drink.
We'll just ignore it. So let's head way back though, before 1994 or whatever it was, to you and growing up. So you said that you'd moved to Suffolk in the 90s. So where had you grown up? What was life for you back however far?
Back. Right. Okay. Well, I was born in Nigeria.
Hey.
And that was some time ago, and really spent the first 9 or 10 years of my life there in Nigeria, but also going to boarding school in the UK up until around about the age of 10, that sort of time, 10, 11. And
so what were your parents doing in Nigeria? Why were you there?
Well, they were part of the Nigerian government. My dad was in the Ministry of Education and Health, and then he also helped to set up the broadcasting service in Nigeria. And I remember at one time a vague memory of him doing the broadcast of when the Queen visited Nigeria on the radio, and there was me with my little Union Jack waving as she went by Lagos race course and visited everybody. So
wow.
So that was quite an experience, just being born in Nigeria and just being there some of the time.
So that was first up to
10
years old, was it?
1960, that was. Then came back to the UK after that, and we lived in London. And then High school, I went to another boarding school. So basically, most of my education has been at boarding schools.
Wow.
And that was a really nice school. It was a co-educational boarding school. Loved it. So that was great. I
Interesting.
loved living in London as well.
Yeah.
But during holidays, you could see your mates that are living in London and just all London life as well. And the 60s, of course, was quite an amazing time to be there. Spent a lot of time in Carnaby Street.
Did
You know,
you?
flared
Wow.
trousers, flowered shirts, all that sort of thing.
I
Long
think
hair.
maybe sometime we could dig out some pictures of all of that.
Yeah, there are a few floating around.
So if we went back to that 10-year-old boy that was in Nigeria, what would that 10-year-old Will have said at that point, having been born in Nigeria, spent time there? What would he have said he wanted to do when he was a grown-up?
Well, I think it sort of varied from being a cricketer to an actor to an engineer to a teacher to a magician, all these sorts of things that I had aspirations to do all sorts of things. And it's that sort of time when you really don't know what you want to do, but you sort of come across something, oh, that looks really nice. I wouldn't mind doing that, or something else.
And also, I think as a child, you don't have this sort of adult pessimism sometimes about like, oh, that's actually going to be really hard, or you're going to need to do this, this, and this to do that. I think as a child, you actually, you just think you can do anything, which is good, isn't it? I think
it's sort of like getting your first magician set, and just doing that in front of your parents and saying, "Oh, this is really cool. I can do this."
Yeah, definitely. And then the whole growing up and then seeing the world through adult eyes, but also that whole aging thing, I'm just finding bizarre. The older I get, I just find it bizarre. I think when you are 10, that 10-year-old boy, you think being 18 is just an old person, don't you? And then you're 18 and then you think a 30-year-old is, and every time you get to one of these ages that you've perceived as old, you realize that you pretty much feel the same as you previously had, don't you? I'm like you with adult children, and it's their mid-20s, and I really, really often feel that I am similar sort of age. Obviously, I'm not, but it's a weird one, isn't it? This perception that you're at some point going to feel old. And is that just me? Do you kind of have that thing with aging?
I totally agree with you. I really, in a sense, I feel a bit like an aging hippie, because that's that sort of time was my formative years. It's interesting when your kids come round now. Well, they're not kids; they're grown up, and they look through your vinyl record collection, and they say, "Dad, that's a really cool record." And they're probably looking at the first edition of, Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon, or something like that. Or your record of Stan Getz, when the first record I bought, jazz player. I said, right, we play that all the time. But then the other side of it is, you think, right, my kids sort of they beat us now articulate. Which my mind is not exactly running as quickly as it did.
And
there
are little telltale signs, aren't there? Yeah.
You still sort of think as if you're back at that sort of time, really.
Yeah, definitely. So that childhood, which is quite extraordinary, was it happy? Would you describe it as a happy childhood?
Sort of yes and no, really. I think I enjoyed my time at school, and that was probably good because my parents went through a pretty messy divorce when I was around about 13.
Right.
And my dad left, or my mum actually divorced him, and he then left and he went to work in Rome, in Italy. So for some of the sort of summer holidays, we spent in Rome with him. And other times we were back home. And then it was just my mum and two sisters, and my mum had to go out to work. And so, we sort of grew up pretty quickly, taking responsibility for looking after ourselves a lot of the time. So it was So yeah, I enjoyed school, and that was a bit of a respite in a sense from what was going on at home.
Interesting. And so enjoying school, was that because you were a natural learner? Was that part of that enjoyment, or was it all about escaping from some stuff that was tricky? Bit
I
of
think it
both?
was partly escaping, but it was also, I wouldn't say I was a natural learner. I was very inquisitive.
Okay.
So you can be inquisitive about a lot of things, but if there's things that I'm not really interested in that, and then you may sort of, just be more inquisitive about something else. Now, I did not do very well in my O levels initially, and that sort of gave me a bit of a bump and said, oh, right, you've got to concentrate a little bit more. And then
Okay.
I actually got it together and got some decent O levels and did A level.
Right.
But really, really enjoyed school, my high school, because there was a lot of things like acting, got involved in that, and music. And there was, I got involved in a printing works, which was really a sort of like a gang of mates getting together to be together and do something.
Nice.
And, it was a co-educational boarding school, so there were lots of girls around. So that was great, just thoroughly enjoyed it. And I was also the DJ as well for the
Ah, wow, fantastic. And so after
and I had a
school,
bit of kudos.
yeah, definitely. And then after school, you went to uni?
Yeah.
That was next. Weren't you DJing at uni as well?
I did, yes.
Yes, because I
And
remember from talking to Jenny, your wife, I think that's how she met you, wasn't it?
that was the first time. Yeah, I went to uni. I went to uni and studied agriculture
Okay.
because I wanted to do an applied science, because it was sort of at the time when I was really thinking about what could I do to help change the world, and
Wow.
that was, and even before then, I was sort of thinking, right, what is the meaning of life? What is the purpose of it? That sort of thing. One of the things I think, well, you can do something to actually change people's lives, and that's part of the reason for doing that. But then I went to uni, studied agriculture, and that's where I met Jenny.
Across the dance floor, because she came I think she came and approached you because you were the DJ.
Yeah, she did, and I was a bit rude actually, because
Oh, she didn't dob you in for that. She didn't say that.
she was very, very, very good about that, really. But I was just so busy doing what I was, and she said, oh, nice collection of records of here. What the sort of things you got here? Yeah, well, if you want to have a look, just look at those over there. So then I just carried on.
Dismissed her. Just dismissed her. Look at the records. But it was the beginning of a lovely, lovely story. I think actually in talking to Jenny, I think she alluded to what you just said about you being a thinker and a questioner. I mean, even I think to have that question on your mind at that stage of life of like, what can I do to change the world, is just like incredible. But that was very much part of you, that questioning, yeah?
Yeah, and I think I sort of thought at the time, and probably with Jenny as well, how do you change the world? Well, politics is one of the ways. You can get involved in changing the environment that people live in and changing. So just to be active in that. So that was student politics. But then thinking about in the wider context, what is it you can do to change things? And it was all about not necessarily changing people, but changing the environment, changing how things happen.
Yeah, interesting.
Really thinking of it from that sort of perspective.
Brilliant. And so I hadn't known until talking to you about being born in Nigeria. So I guess there was something in your makeup about just having this big world vision. But your studies, or was it your work that then took you overseas? Because I know you then went abroad, even when you were dating Jenny, didn't you?
Yeah. So yeah, after university, I thought, well, if I really want to get an idea of a bit more about what you can do to change things, I needed to get a perspective from somewhere else, and I wanted to go back to Africa, having been born there and lived there for a bit. It's a bit like, that was my first home. So I joined you at VSO, Voluntary Service Overseas, and went to Sierra Leone, where I was working at a teacher training college, where they were teaching teachers to teach agriculture. And so I was there and learned a bit more about tropical agriculture, growing pineapples and things like that. But then I also met some other people that were doing voluntary service. And one was a Canadian doctor, and he was doing the equivalent of Canadian VSO.
Okay.
He brought his family over there, got to know him and some other people there. And that was when, things started to change, really. Just seeing him. And he was working in Freetown Hospital. And he'd given up his life in a really good practice in Canada, brought his family over to be a volunteer. And Freetown Hospital was pretty basic, really. And he was a pediatrician and working there. And I just saw what the dedication of his life and the sacrifices that he had made with his family, and just needed to find out a bit about him, and just got to know him, and he got to know me, discovered he was a Christian.
Okay.
And that started lots of conversations happening.
Okay.
And my roommate was a Christian, was not a Christian, he was Canadian, and he was asking the same sort of questions as well.
Okay. And was this kind of your first experience of Christianity? Had you had much involvement with people of faith before that?
Not really, because my parents weren't Christians.
Yeah.
I mean, my parents were pretty active in politics as well. Just in being active there, not sort of politicians.
Yeah.
My primary school, there was, Christian services. It was quite a Christian school, lots of Bible stories, but didn't really know much about it, really.
Right. Okay.
So
it was the impact of seeing somebody else and the way they were actually living their life and the things they'd given up that had huge impact on you and was making you think and question stuff about your own life.
Yeah, it really was. And then you start thinking, well, back to what is the meaning of life? What is the purpose of it? I can remember back in my primary school, just just in my bed in the dormitory, and I was in a sort of part of a dormitory that had a big turret, and you could look out, and there was this window that had a sort of 366-degree view practically, and looking out, and one night just seeing all the stars out there, and you sort of thinking, right, that is really big out there, and is this all just some sort of cosmic joke that we're all just sort of material atoms and there's nothing else to it? We were born, we live, we die, that's it, But then, starting to talk with this Canadian doctor and some of the other sort of Christians that were out there, got me thinking that actually it's not just about changing the environment that people live in. What's got to change is me. And that's got me thinking about it. And then they invited me to a Bible study, and I said, yeah, in for a penny, in for a pound, I'll go and see what it's all about, because I was getting really interested.
And I guess also, if these were people that you liked and respected and were really kind of intrigued by, I guess anything they were suggesting that you might do or invited you to was quite attractive as well.
Yeah. And no television, nothing else, go find out.
Something to do. Did you get food? Did they give you food?
Yeah, there was actually. There we were, sort of waifs and strays volunteers, and there's people feeding us. So, yeah.
So you went along to something?
Yeah, I went along, and they were sort of listening to a tape by a guy called David Watson, who was, I think he was an Anglican sort of preacher, evangelist.
Yeah.
And he was talking on the subject of love. Now, at that time, I was really interested in Jenny, and just thinking, I would really like to be with her for the rest of my life. I mean, when I first met her and sort of started going out with her, it was a bit complicated because I already had a girlfriend.
That is complicated.
That got complicated, really. But eventually, Jenny won out, really, in my heart. So I went out to Sierra Leone, and then this topic of love that he was talking about, but he talked about the love of Christ and the change that needed to happen in me because of what Jesus had done for me. And if I wanted to really change the world, the real change had to happen in me first before anything else could happen. And so I listened to it, and I was just blown over by what he was saying, really.
Because you felt this was things you were kind of hearing for the first time.
Yeah, I mean, it was hearing about the Christian story, but with more of it's about me having a personal relationship with Christ, rather than something that you do, or that Jesus is just out there as a good person.
Yeah.
But he was saying, submit yourself to me. I can give you the forgiveness that you need, you know, in order to transform your life so that you can be the person that I want you to be.
Yeah.
And, you know, that was in that sense of sacrificial love that he demonstrated. At the end of that Bible study, I said, can I, you know, borrow the tape? Because I wanted, it was a cassette tape at that time.
Yeah.
Because I was just so intrigued by what he said, and I wanted to listen to it again. Took it home, and then at the end of it, the bit where they'd actually cut off the tape, you know, and they had to do a discussion, there was a prayer. And he invited people to pray to receive Christ. So I said, prayer, okay, well, brought up in school that you kneel down to pray. So I actually knelt down and prayed to become a Christian.
So what would that prayer have looked like? What would you have said within that at that time?
I think it was something like this: Lord Jesus, I accept that there is bad things in my life, sin in my life, that you've come into this world to change me, to help me to be the person that you want me to be. I'm asking you to come into my life and forgive me and be Lord of my life. Just like that. All words to that. Anyway.
Yeah. And what was the immediate effect of, was there an immediate effect of praying that prayer, making that actual decision to become a Christian? What was the impact of that?
Sense of sort of life opening up and having a meaning, having a purpose. I knew why I was here, and you know what my purpose was, in a sense, to love God and love others. But I think almost also a sense of relief of having some of the questions that I had answered through that, really. And
that's great. That's great. I'm intrigued to know if you're still in contact with those people.
I'm in contact, sort of Christmas card wise.
Okay.
I think, but not just, you know, lives of sort of
different ways.
Ways.
Isn't it great though that I think we're all links in a chain quite often, and how people can play such a significant part in your life, and then you move on and other people do, and I think we sometimes underestimate the part we can play as well in other people's lives. Oh, I love that story. It's just amazing. And I know, carry on.
Sorry, I can see where you're going here, but then
it's because I've spoken to Jenny.
I know you spoke to Jenny, but then I wrote back to Jenny and I said, hey, Jenny, you know what?
Because at this point you'd got engaged, hadn't you?
That's right. Yes,
so
we got engaged.
And honestly, like the most romantic story ever, having spoken to Jenny a few weeks ago, that you wrote to her and asked her to marry you, and she wrote back and said yes. It's just like so romantic. But then there was another letter. So she's planning a wedding, isn't she? She's getting the wedding all sorted at home in England, because you're on separate continents. And then
it was a bit sort of Jane Austen, you know, writing letters.
Just wonderful. But then another letter.
Then another letter. And I wrote back to her. I said, hey Jenny, my life has changed completely, and I've become a Christian. And I wrote to her and I said what that meant to me and why I'd done it and what had happened. And I said, but I still love you and I still, you know, want to marry you, but I've changed. I really, you know, have changed. And she wrote back and she said, I'm not so sure about this. And it was sort of all off. So she said, no, I don't think this is going to work. But I said, look, just, you know, we'll stop the wedding for the moment. I need to come back and we need to talk this through. So that's what I did. But the interesting thing was, the Christians that I was with, and I talked to them, and they were really good in helping me think this through, because they said, look, you've changed. Your outlook on life has changed. You're still, in a sense, the same person, but your whole set of values has changed. Will you marrying Jenny really work if you're just now quite different in what you believe and what you think? So you need to tread carefully here and really think that through, that if Jenny really thinks that this is not for her, you've got to think that, is the marriage actually really going to work? So we prayed, and I prayed that God would help Jenny to see that Christianity is the way to go, and her to accept Christ. But
Mm.
if she didn't, then to feel that God had something else for me and somebody else in my life that would be,
Mm.
you know, a life partner.
Mm. That's
But
just
then I
amazing.
sort of, yeah, just that sense of peace at that time that God gave me, in spite of the tensions that there were there.
Yeah, yeah, and the not knowing, that was an
Yeah,
unknown, wasn't it? You'd made that commitment, but you didn't know at that stage whether that still was going to mean a life with Jenny or not. That's massive, and also such an indication of how certain you were about this decision to become a
absolutely.
Christian,
Yeah,
because you were standing to lose Jenny. You
yeah.
didn't know that you weren't going to. Yeah, amazing.
But
But
knowing that it wouldn't work unless she
she was
did.
on board. Yeah. And of course, from talking to Jenny, I know that you spent that time together when she came back, and yeah, lots and lots of talking, I believe.
Yeah,
And she then did
yeah,
decide to become a Christian as well.
yeah.
Amazing
And
story.
a couple of months
Really,
later,
really
we
good.
got married.
Yes, it was back
Yeah,
on.
and our parents were really confused.
I bet.
What? Yes. Are you sure about this? Yes, we are sure. Yes. I think the vicar was pretty confused as well. He was off, and it was on again.
On. It's a lovely story. I love it. I really love it. And then, of course, so you've had this whole life together, and at various points, you as a couple have spent quite a lot of time in Africa, haven't you, and been
Yeah.
involved in various different things. Do you think that those early years, or that time in your 20s when you were either in Nigeria or Sierra Leone, did that really instill in you this real heart for Africa?
Yeah, yeah, it did really, and also knowing something just about African culture,
Mm,
you know,
yeah.
also,
Mm,
and not that anybody could really totally understand another culture, but
mm,
having a bit of understanding of there, and feeling sort of comfortable
mm.
living there, and
Yeah,
just comfortable
yeah,
being there.
yeah, definitely.
So
So tell us a little bit about what those kind of following decades have been, the things that you've been involved with and what you've done.
yeah, so I mean, after university, well, and then when I came back, we got married. We decided to get a bit more training. We went to teach training college together, which is quite interesting, and then did some experience of teaching, and then thought, well, we want to go overseas. This is what Christians do. They get involved in mission, you know, change the world. And having had that experience, we decided, okay, what do I need to get a job overseas. So there was a job that came up working in Swaziland, East
Okay.
Swatini as it is known now.
Yeah.
And that was to help set up a school's agriculture program. And so, yeah, got the job there, went out there. And before we went, we prayed that we'd meet up with some other Christians, you know, just to get involved in, you know, what we could do as Christians in the country as well. So went out there, and that school's agriculture program was really good. I really enjoyed that. It was helping to set up agriculture in schools in Swaziland.
Mm.
And I was really encouraged that they'd done some research beforehand about why schools programs in agriculture succeed or fail in Africa.
Mm.
And I think that sense of being humble enough to find out from the people you're going to try and help, really important, because quite often when people say, you know, we're going overseas to help, you know, we know best and you need to listen to us and this is how it's going to be. But
Yeah,
that really
I think
instills
Jenny
me.
gave us some examples of where that doesn't work. You know, people just piling in, doing, leaving, and it just doesn't work because it doesn't sit well culturally, and it doesn't show an understanding of impact as well of some things that what can happen. Yeah.
So really enjoyed that, and our two kids, you know, were born out there, Matthew and Jonathan. It was a great place to have kids, and then we also at that time got to know another American couple who were part of Campus Crusade. Now, I think in this country they're called Agape, but they were people who initially put the money behind the Jesus film that came out, and that couple, American couple, really mentored us and discipled us. We were pretty new Christians, being Christians for a couple of years, and I really value them putting the time into us. And then eventually we actually joined Campus Crusade as the missionaries, associate missionaries with them, and were involved in, you know, helping to grow a church there and some of their evangelistic campaigns.
Mm.
So it was a real formative time just in our Christian life as well.
Yeah, yeah.
And just demonstrated to me the real importance of having people around you that can disciple you and mentor you, help you grow in that sense of Christian community.
Yeah, I think it's something we should all be really intentional about. I don't think it necessarily just happens. A few years ago, I kind of came to a point where I was really conscious of who was having influence in my life, and I really sought out people to be intentional about spending time with, because I think they're good for me. I think we have to sometimes actually do something about it, don't we?
Yeah.
Then
more decades, after that. Then came back from Swaziland, didn't have a job. Fortunately, there was a job going with the Agricultural Training Board. That was at Stoneleigh, which was the National Agricultural Centre. And they were setting up, I have a management training centre there. So I joined them and helped to run training courses for anybody involved in the food industry. And that was from vets to farmers to horticultural places, garden centres. And I really enjoyed that as well. And then after that, we were involved in a church over there. Then we moved to Suffolk because there was a job with Fram Farmers, actually, that was going to help to set up for them a training consultancy as well as a subsidiary company. So joined that. And then it was at that time then we started to go to MCF, or Mental Christian Fellowship, now the Forge. And we did all sorts of interesting things with different companies, mainly running in-service management training courses, and with some veterinary pharmaceutical companies, research companies, pharmaceutical companies, garden centre companies. And a lot of it was their graduate training programs. So you've been a graduate, you come to join a company, and they put you on an in-service sort of graduate training program. But then eventually we decided, well, we could do this ourselves. So we bought out the company and then set it up ourselves. And then there was a number of us who were interested in sailing. So we set up sort of a team building courses working from Shotley, just opposite Felixstowe. And so we took people out on 40-foot sailing yachts, around that area. And then also sometimes down in the Channel Islands, sailing down there. Enjoyed that. So that's part of what we did as the company there.
Lovely.
And that was some work overseas during that time, sometime in India and Bangladesh and Romania, Kenya, different places, running courses overseas.
Great.
But then there was a big change that happened. Been doing that for a number of years, and I decided I want to get back involved in some sort of full-time mission work. And there was a role that came up with SIM, Serving in Mission, and they were at Wetheringset, their UK and Europe headquarters, and they were advertising for a communications director. And so I applied there, and that was really big change. That was it was not like sort of midlife crisis sort of time. It was sort of when I was in the 40s. So and that really was a big change. And in that, I then did the communications director's bit, and then also became the deputy director there. And that was mobilizing people to go out in mission all around the world. And so I worked in about 40 different countries. So recruiting doctors, teachers, engineers.
And so was it that working with SIM that led you to being in Liberia? Was that
right.
Part of that connection? Okay.
Yeah, so I did that from 2000 to 2010. And then in 2010, with both of our children having left, got their own jobs, and our parents were still okay, reasonably healthy. So it was that sort of time in our lives where there's an opportunity to go back overseas again. And I talked with the folk at SIM, and I said, look, I'd like to go to a place that's sort of reasonably sort of small, but wanting to develop. Then I suppose rather cannily, the international director at SIM said, well, why don't you go and do an evaluation of the ministry in Liberia. And so we went out as a team. We were doing just an evaluation of what the work was like in ministry. And Liberia at that time was really had gone through a 14-year civil war. The country was totally devastated. There'd been quite a lot of work that SM had done in Liberia. They had a hospital and a radio station. They'd planted about 110 churches there, and the Liberians had taken over the management and running of the churches there. But in the 14-year civil war, the hospital was pretty beat up, bullet holes in it. The radio station had been bombed and was devastated. Where we were was, and then we decided, yeah, this looks like an interesting challenge. So we signed up for it, and at that time there were about 5 of us in the mission team, but around about 250 Liberian staff there. And that was a really interesting time. I mean, you could say interesting inverted commas, which means stressful, weary some of the time, challenging, but really exciting.
And I think you've left quite a legacy there, haven't you? I mean, there are things that are ongoing now because you were there and because you got them up and running, aren't there?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that was happening at that time, there was actually a dispute with the government about land that we had there, and they wanted to take it over. And a lot of the people, the staff at the Elwa campus, as it was, didn't want that to happen, and the churches didn't want that to happen. So there was the churches on one hand, and the government on one hand, and us in the middle there. And it came to a real head where, sort of cutting a long story short, where somebody decided to knock down the security wall around our campus, which was probably about 500 yards long, maybe longer, right at the front, because they said, this is now government land, it's not yours. And the staff at Elwa said, Will, you've got to do something about this. We've got to go out on the streets, we've got to protest, and really. And I thought, I don't want to get involved in this, and so I said, and this is where I think sometimes God gives you the words to say to a group of people where the natural inclination is to go out there and fight and do something. But I said, hey guys, what we need to do is we need to sit down, we really need to pray about this, that there's going to be a solution that is peaceful and that we can live peacefully with the government and get on with doing things right. Okay, we'll do that, they said. And then lo and behold, 2 weeks later, the head of the government services agency came to my office and said, Will, I've been instructed by the president to rebuild the wall outside your security area. Wow. So I went back to the staff and I told them this, and they were sort of flabbergasted. It was one of those things where, our weapons are not, sort of flesh and blood. It's prayer. It's not about fighting in the sense of getting out there with a sword and a banner, but actually the power of prayer and having that trust in God that He will fight your battles. So that was a real testimony to the staff. Yeah.
Sounds like a really interesting time. I think, Will, you must have such a a broad view because of the various places you've lived and the different cultures that you've kind of existed in. I just think, is there a frustration about perhaps how other people are when you come across them? I just kind of almost think so. My very limited experience of having spent time in Africa, but also my daughter having been out in Zambia for a year, really coming back, I think, shaped some of my thinking and especially some of my language, some of the things I say, because suddenly there's a different sort of yardstick that I'm measuring things against. And so I think particularly, when we first went into lockdown last year, and lots of news articles about people being so upset about things they're going to have to go without. and my daughter had just come back from Zambia, and would say to me, oh, so we might not have pasta for a little while, but you know, she's been with people that don't always know where their next meal is coming from and whether there is going to be a next meal. Do you think we get it wrong in just like our view of the world at times? Is it frustrating for you because of your experiences?
It is frustrating, but I think we could sort it out. But it depends on our perspective. I think really, in order to sort these sort of things out, we've got to change our perspective. So we've got to change from the inside and out. A bit like my experience in Sierra Leone. I wanted to change the world, and I was, in a sense, going around it the wrong way. I think for us to get things right, people need to change internally and think. In order for me to do something about it, if I change, then my perspective on other people changes, and I treat people with humanity and justice and mercy and all those sorts of things, and recognizing who is my brother, my sister, my neighbor. And my neighbor is not just the person next to me, but it is also the person who's living 2,000 miles away as well. And I think it's not only on the micro level, your neighbors next to you in your village or your town, but like with the vaccine, I think our politicians have begun to realize this, that it's not just us getting the vaccine, but actually the world getting the vaccine, because it won't actually solve it unless we actually help the world to get the vaccine as well. And it's where being selfish is actually counterintuitive. It's actually just not going to help. And it's the same with other things. You know, with trade, if we really want to trade with other nations, we've got to help other nations trade well, so that we can benefit from the things that they have that we don't have. Do that well and do it fairly.
It was a really interesting discussion, I think I was just tapping to on the news the other day, about this idea of us sharing the vaccine, you know, that we've got surplus and we share it worldwide, and people's responses just really varied from, no, it's ours and we came up with it and we need to look after ourselves. But the other extreme of what you're saying, that actually none of us are safe until all of us are safe, and we need to think so much bigger. And I think you must be very good at that because of the experiences you've had. Just see us as humanity and the world, and not just as these individuals existing in our little pocket of the world.
The same thing happened in Liberia with the Ebola crisis, because we were in the middle of that. And there, you know, sadly, I mean, through that crisis, about 11,500 people died, about 4,500 or more in Liberia. And in our hospital, you know, we had 400 Ebola beds there, and people, you know, dying. But there was no cure for it. And it was fascinating to see that the reaction of other countries other than Liberia, whereas, oh, Ebola is going to come to America or to, you know, the UK, and we don't want to have anything to do with these people. And when you have people from the UK who get sick with Ebola and they were coming back to the UK, real sense of fear, you know, that it's coming to us, rather than saying, here's a person who's suffering, who's actually part of the UK. We need to help them.
Is there there's a sort of tension in my mind, and I don't know if it's too simplistic, that because we are affected by coronavirus, there's been this urgency, and there's been so much poured into finding a vaccine and rolling it out, which is good and it's right, but there's just this tension in my mind that it's because we're affected, and there are still people dying in the developing world of such diseases that so easily can be eradicated. But is it as awful as, I don't know, is it as awful as, but it's not affecting us, and so we're not doing anything about it? I mean, it just grieves me.
And you could think, well, you know, back to the fundamental question of why does suffering happen in the world? And, you know, couldn't God just sort of turn around and fix it all? Well, he could.
Mm.
I think God could, because he's sovereign. But I think there's also the sense in which we have free will. We can choose to live as God would want us to live, or choose not to.
Mm.
And there's a whole part of us that really chooses not to.
Mm.
You know, we
Mm.
don't like sort of authority generally, and what has God got to say about us, and why should I believe him? But God gives us that choice,
Mm.
you know, and if we say that God loves us, that gives us the opportunity not to love him back.
Mm.
It's the same with me and Jenny. You know, I chose, I did love her, but she said, no, I don't, because of who you are.
Mm.
And eventually we worked it out.
Mm.
But it's the same sort of thing.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
not choosing to live how God wants us to do, that's a sense of rejecting him and not willing to be changed ourselves. And so you get acts of terrorism, injustice, domestic abuse, those sort of things happening, and us being selfish in terms of what we want and not recognizing our brother needs it just as much.
Yeah, which is a really good answer, because I think it is a question that comes up often, I think, when people are exploring faith, or if people want to immediately dismiss it, just that idea of how can God be a loving God, or how can he even exist when there is so much suffering in the world? But I think, in a sense, what you've just said is a very good reply to that kind of statement, isn't it? That we've all got our own responsibility.
I don't think God really wants us to be robots. You know, if he said, I will do this and you will love me because I'm God, sort of thing, he says, you've got a choice.
Yeah.
And it's not that we don't have suffering as Christians. I mean, Paul, he wrote a third of the New Testament. He went through agonizing suffering himself. And there's lots of Christians who are out there suffering because of their faith. So there was not the sense of being a Christian gets you out of suffering. That's not true.
Not at all. Yeah. It's really interesting talking to you. You've got such an interesting story. What is it that's keeping you busy now, Will? What are you up to now with stuff?
Right. Well, I'm being busy being retired, really.
Oh. It's the dream.
No, we're leading a 10-week group here at the Forge, which is great. Really enjoy doing that.
Yeah.
I'm also on the board of Sizewell Hall.
Okay.
And that's been a really difficult time because we haven't had anybody there since March.
Yeah.
And just keeping the place sort of ticking over until we can have people. And it seems like that won't happen really until June.
Yeah.
So people have been really generous in supporting.
They had such a phenomenal response, didn't they, to their fundraising, which I just, in a sense, I wasn't surprised. I thought, so many people love that place and so many people don't want it to go under that. I just thought, that was really interesting to have raised so much money.
So keeping that going and keeping the staff there going and just looking to the future and future plans, those sort of things. So that's been kept me pretty busy. Then we also help out our village hall. So we're on our village hall committee.
Great.
And I don't think we have meetings like the ones that have gone viral.
Okay.
Recently. But it's just sort of being part of the community, really, and just helping out there and just and enjoying that. And being a granddad. And
of course your boys aren't nearby, are they? So you're doing lots of Zooming and chatting to grandchildren via.
So Matt is he's fairly nearby in Colchester.
Okay.
But Johnny is over in New York.
Yes.
And
with the snow.
With the snow, yes, and being locked down there as well. But interesting, they're hoping to come back later this year to the UK permanently. So
lovely. It's been really lovely to hear all that detail about your life. I love your story of coming to faith as well, and I often want to say when we're doing this, if that's a story that resonates with people, we at the Forge would love to help people with their journey, exploring faith, making decisions about faith, finding out who Jesus is. So just contact us and we would love to chat that through. And Will, I am sure you would be really happy to chat with anyone that you know, who, if your story resonated with people and they would like to know more, I'm sure you could chat even more with people. So yeah, do get in contact with us. Just to finish up, Will, and I did warn you of this question because it's a biggie. I love the last question, it's a big one. But I did warn Will in case you're sitting there thinking, imagine asking that. I think you speak with such wisdom and authority. I think you're a really great role model. If you were to put into one sentence advice about parenting, marriage, and your Christian journey, what would it be?
I think about parenting, I would say don't exasperate your children. It's probably that. I mean, Paul talks about that, you know, in one of his letters, and he says, and I think don't exasperate, love them, teach them, yes, discipline them occasionally, but love them, whatever, you know, whatever journey they go on, just love them, whatever. So that's parenting.
I love that. It's brilliant.
And then about marriage, I think, I mean, Paul again, he says, you know,
don't exasperate your wife.
Well, that's true. Yeah, don't exasperate. But by loving your wife, as Paul says, you don't exasperate her. But just don't expect that you can have everything all your own way, you know, in any sort of marriage, you know. And by giving, and this is sort of counterintuitive, by giving more, actually it makes things better, because actually it's better to give than to receive. And by giving, you certainly receive more by that.
That's lovely. And what about your Christian journey?
Christian journey, I think there it's, you know, love God and love others. That's certainly, I mean, Jesus said that anyway. But there's Micah was one of the prophets in the Old Testament, and he had some very wise words to say. He said, this is what the Lord requires of you. What God really requires of you is to act justly, to love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. So I think that sense of, and there's the two things of justice and mercy. Justice is about, in a sense, fighting for those who are, you know, downtrodden, those who are not seeing justice at all, but also for those who act wrongly, in a justice sense, to give mercy, you know, to be forgiving, and to love that sense of mercy. But and also that sense of walking humbly with God, that we don't know all the answers. We don't know all the answers to suffering. This is a bit more than a sentence, isn't it?
It's fine.
We don't know all the answers, but just to walk humbly with God and recognize that He is sovereign, but He loves us, and that we have that hope in Jesus. And I love that bit in the Lord's Prayer that says, you know, your kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. So His kingdom can come here. We're praying for that, but also there's His kingdom in heaven, and you know, in the end, you know, Jesus is Lord.
That's great. I knew you'd have very wise words to say. You didn't let me down. This is so great. Thank you so much for giving me your time this afternoon. It's been really, really lovely to chat with you, and just to I've learned more about you, most definitely. And you're always
a bit more about myself.
You're really inspiring. And yeah, it's really great to have you as part of the Forge. Always is. Yeah. Thanks so much for your time. See ya.
Pleasure. Bye.
Bye.